police car like what happens when a smug congressman mocks a former prosecutor on live TV? He found out the hard way. Congressman Joe Morelle tried to take a cheap shot at Pam Bondi during what was supposed to be a routine panel. But within minutes, she flipped the script, silenced the room, and left him completely dismantled, all in front of a live national audience. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a masterclass in calm, controlled destruction. Backhand index pointing right, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more real, unfiltered stories like this one. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into how Pam Bondi turned the tables and left Joe Morelle with nothing but a smirk he couldn't explain. It was supposed to be another boring cable news panel until Joe Morelle made one mistake: he mocked Pam Bondi. Live TV has a way of revealing people. You can rehearse talking points, smile for the cameras, and hope to make it through the segment without going viral for the wrong reason. But when Congressman Joe Morelle and Pam Bondi were booked for a live appearance on Capitol Roundtable, nobody expected fireworks. After all, it was just another Wednesday evening panel debate, typical partisanship, a few zingers, and out. That illusion shattered 4 minutes in. The segment began civilly enough. The anchor, a grinning veteran who had moderated hundreds of these debates, welcomed viewers to what was framed as a spirited discussion on government oversight and political accountability. On the left, Joe Morelle, a New York Democrat known for his calm, wonky demeanor. On the right, Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General and cable news regular, sharp, unapologetic, and famously unafraid to call things exactly as she sees them. The two had sparred before, mostly off-air in dueling op-eds and social media jabs. But this was their first live face-off. From the start, Bondi held her ground. "The American people are tired of investigations that go nowhere," she said, referring to what many on the right saw as politically motivated probes by congressional Democrats. "It's selective accountability, nothing more." Morelle, smirking slightly, responded with what might have seemed like a throwaway line. "Well, I suppose facts are optional in Pam's world," he said with a chuckle. The anchor laughed nervously. Bondi didn't. There was a second, just a second, where her expression froze. Not in confusion, not in anger. It was the stillness of a professional who had just been underestimated on national television. And in that pause, you could feel the atmosphere shift. Viewers watching from home leaned a little closer to the screen. The panelists stopped smiling. Pam Bondi straightened in her chair. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "You want to repeat that?" Morelle shrugged, perhaps thinking he could double down. "I just mean that the right tends to embellish. That's all." "Big mistake." "Let me be very clear," Bondi said, locking eyes with the camera, her voice clipped and firm. "I deal in facts. I prosecuted cases. I argued before judges. I didn't sit in committee rooms throwing around jargon and pretending to know more than I do." The panel was no longer a discussion, it was a showdown. Morelle tried to cut in, but Bondi wasn't finished. "You can laugh, Congressman," she said, her tone sharper now. "But facts don't care whether you find them convenient." In those few short seconds, what had started as a standard TV segment transformed into a live verbal chess match, one that millions of viewers were now tuned into in real time. Twitter, or rather, X, lit up within moments. "Whoa, Bondi's not playing. Morelle just stepped on a landmine." This went from zero to courtroom real quick. What made the moment electrifying wasn't just the insult, it was how cleanly Bondi turned it around. No yelling. No name-calling. Just precise, laser-focused rebuttal, delivered with the timing of someone who's been in hundreds of high-pressure rooms and never once blinked. In a world of overproduced soundbites, this was raw, unscripted TV. You could practically hear producers in the control room yelling, "Keep them live. Don't cut to commercial." The anchor, caught somewhere between awe and panic, finally stepped in. "All right, let's keep this respectful, please." Too late. Respect had left the building, replaced by righteous fury and viral energy. And in that moment, Joe Morelle realized something millions of viewers were realizing with him: you don't mock Pam Bondi on live television. Not unless you're ready for what comes next. Joe Morelle should have stopped talking. But like many before him who mistook silence for surrender, he didn't know what was coming. After Pam Bondi fired back at his smug remark, "Facts are optional in Pam's world," there was a distinct shift in the air. You could feel it through the screen. The anchor, who had up until now been casually riding the middle, suddenly leaned forward, sensing something combustible was brewing. Morelle, still leaning into his DC sarcasm, smiled as if he'd already won. "Look, Pam, I'm just saying this isn't a Fox News monologue. This is a serious discussion." Bondi gave him that tight, lawyer's smile, the one that says, "Thank you for walking into the trap." "I agree," she said, voice cool. "So maybe you should start treating it like one." That line landed like a jab to the ribs. The anchor flinched. Morelle shifted in his seat. The moment was no longer about policy or oversight. It had become personal and dangerously close to going off script. Trying to recover, the anchor stepped in. "Congressman, let's move into the specifics of your claims," Morelle nodded, clearing his throat. "Right. As I was saying, these so-called whistleblower reports are mostly hearsay. Unvetted. Unverified. We're not going to build serious oversight policy on internet rumors and partisan complaints." Bondi's eyes flicked to the camera, a practiced move. She knew millions were watching now, not just the panel or the room. This was her audience. "Internet rumors," she repeated, slowly, as if the phrase had a bad taste. "You mean the sworn affidavits? The documented communications between agencies and tech platforms? That's what you're calling rumors?" Morelle smiled again, thin, strained. "Pam, don't take it so personally." And there it was. The second mistake. Bigger than the first. Bondi leaned forward, elbows on the desk, her hands folded. Not angry, focused. Calm in the way only a seasoned litigator can be before dismantling an opponent. "You think because I'm passionate, I'm emotional. Because I speak directly, I'm being dramatic. That's what this is about, isn't it?" Morelle said nothing. "Let me ask you something, Congressman," Bondi continued. "Do you actually believe that political actors never misuse power? That agencies never act with bias? Or do you just believe it's okay when they're targeting people you don't like?" Boom. That line changed the temperature of the room. The anchor went pale. Morelle glanced sideways, as if scanning for the exit ramp from the conversation. There wasn't one. Bondi had cornered him with the one thing cable news rarely offers: accountability without spin. Still, he tried to pivot. "Nobody's saying government is perfect. But this idea that there's some vast, left-wing conspiracy," "No one's talking about a conspiracy," Bondi interrupted. "We're talking about a documented pattern of selective enforcement. About the public losing trust because they see two sets of rules. One for the people in power, and another for the rest of us." Her tone had hardened, but never raised. No shouting, no insults, just pressure. Controlled. Legal. Dangerous. "And when someone like me points it out," she continued, "you mock. You laugh. You call it a Fox News monologue. You don't refute it. You just belittle it." Morelle, clearly frustrated now, raised his voice for the first time. "Pam, come on, this is exactly the kind of manufactured outrage that keeps this country divided." Bondi didn't move. "What divides this country isn't outrage, it's arrogance. Yours, specifically." The panel froze. The chat feed online exploded. Bondi just flipped the table. "This isn't a panel anymore. It's a trial. Someone check on Morelle." And then, in a perfect moment of irony, Morelle interrupted her again. "Let me respond to that." "No," Bondi said firmly. "You've had plenty of time. And the only thing you've done is prove my point." The anchor, now visibly rattled, tried to break the moment. "Okay, let's take a quick break." "No," Bondi said again, her voice colder now. "Let's stay here. This is where it gets real." Pam Bondi had done what few on live TV manage, she froze the room without raising her voice. "No," she said again, eyes locked on Joe Morelle. "Let's stay here. This is where it gets real." Morelle had no comeback, not yet. He shifted in his seat, glanced toward the off-camera crew like he was waiting for a lifeline. None came. The producers weren't cutting to commercial. They knew they had struck ratings gold, and they weren't letting go now. Bondi continued, voice calm, firm. "You talk about division. Manufactured outrage. But Congressman, what divides this country is the way people like you hide behind polished soundbites while ignoring real abuse of power." Morelle raised a hand, trying to salvage some control. "You've made your point," but Bondi cut him off, her tone suddenly steely. "No. I don't think I have, not in full." She turned slightly toward the camera now. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. She wasn't just addressing Joe Morelle anymore. She was speaking to the American public. And doing it like she'd been preparing for this moment all her life. "You want to know what the real problem is?" she asked. "It's not partisanship. It's selective outrage. When government agencies go after people you disagree with, you cheer. You leak half-truths to the media. You say trust the process until the process turns around and looks at you." Morelle scoffed, but the sound felt hollow now. "You talk about oversight like it's your job," Bondi said, eyes narrowing. "But what you're really doing is overseeing the narrative. You don't want accountability. You want control." "Control?" Morelle snapped. "You're being ridiculous." "No," Bondi said, leaning forward now. "What's ridiculous is pretending the FBI communicating directly with social media companies to suppress stories right before an election is normal. What's ridiculous is ignoring whistleblower testimony because it doesn't fit your agenda. And what's ridiculous, Congressman, is you mocking me. Then acting surprised when I respond with facts." The anchor tried again to cool things down. "Let's bring this back to the hearing." Bondi waved that off without taking her eyes off Morelle. "We're past the hearing," she said. "We're in the courtroom of public opinion now. And the record shows you're not here to debate, you're here to deflect." Morelle looked stunned, not because of the volume or force of her words, but because of how cleanly she dismantled his position. No shouting. No insults. Just a string of carefully aimed truths that couldn't be laughed off. "You say I live in a world without facts," Bondi continued. "But I've spent my career presenting evidence, not just opinions. I've taken criminals off the streets. I've stood in front of real judges, with real consequences, and defended the rule of law. Can you say the same, Congressman?" The silence after that question was deafening. Online, the moment was already being clipped and captioned, Pam Bondi. "I've stood in front of judges. Can you say the same?" This isn't a panel. It's a cross-examination. Morelle finally found his voice. "This kind of rhetoric is dangerous. You're undermining institutions, I'm holding them accountable," she fired back. "You don't get to wear the word institution like a shield. Institutions only deserve trust when they earn it. That's the part you always leave out." It was a line that could have ended the entire segment right there. And honestly, it might have. The anchor sat back in his chair, realizing there was no regaining control. The conversation had outgrown the segment. It wasn't about the topic anymore. It was about the moment and who owned it. And it was clear who did. Joe Morelle sat quietly now, the smugness long gone. His smile had vanished. His hands, once gesturing confidently, were now motionless in front of him, clasped together like a man waiting for the next blow. Pam Bondi had taken a casual insult and turned it into a national reckoning. And she'd done it live, unfiltered, and without blinking. The segment finally cut to commercial. But the story was far from over. The screen faded to black. The commercial break rolled. In most cases, that's where these heated political exchanges cool off, get buried under the next news cycle. But not this time. By the time Capitol Roundtable returned from break, the entire mood of the show had changed. The anchor's voice was lower, more cautious, and the fake cheer in his tone couldn't disguise what just happened. Pam Bondi had taken over the room, and Joe Morelle had been left flat-footed on live television. Viewers didn't need a recap. They already had one on their phones. The clip of the exchange hit Twitter, X, less than 2 minutes into the break. A junior producer had uploaded a 52-second snippet with the caption, "Bondi drops hammer on Morelle live. Watch to the end." It didn't need hashtags. It didn't need context. It spread like gasoline needing flame. By the end of the hour, the video had over 2.3 million views. By the end of the night, it had crossed 12 million and spawned trending hashtags, hashtag Bondi owns Morelle, hashtag Pam mic drop, hashtag courtroom energy. Conservative commentators ran with it immediately. Tucker Carlson opened his show with the clip. "You're watching what happens when someone finally calls out the arrogance of DC elitism. And they have the facts to back it up." On the opposite side, MSNBC hosts struggled to downplay the damage. One analyst called it a masterclass in political theater, not realizing that calling it theater still acknowledged its power. Another guest muttered, "Morelle looked like he'd just walked into a deposition he wasn't prepped for." He had. The full video was uploaded to YouTube that evening. It hit 1 million views in under 4 hours, boosted by headlines like, "Pam Bondi flips the script on Joe Morelle, live, brutal, and unedited. Watch, Congressman mocks, Bondi destroys in under 3 minutes. This is what happens when you underestimate a prosecutor." Meanwhile, Joe Morelle's office went dark, not literally, but strategically. No tweets. No interviews. No follow-up posts. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. By contrast, Bondi's team put out a short, clipped statement, "Pam Bondi is always ready to speak the truth. Period." It wasn't gloating. It didn't need to be. The video was doing all the work. Even apolitical figures began weighing in. A famous podcast host tweeted, "Pam Bondi went full trial mode. Morelle never saw it coming." That was a live wire moment. And it was. Because it hadn't been a shouting match or a chaos-filled meltdown. It was controlled devastation, with Bondi channeling every inch of her legal experience to deliver lines that landed like cross-examination punches. Inside the network, producers were scrambling. Emails flew. Phones rang. The control room replayed the moment 5 times. One junior staffer reportedly said, "That was the best unscripted segment we've ever had, hands down." By morning, the ripples reached Washington. Several GOP lawmakers tweeted support for Bondi, framing her as a voice of backbone in a sea of spin. Even those who had been cool toward her politically had to admit it, she had dominated the moment. Democrats, meanwhile, were split. Some distanced themselves from Morelle, criticizing his tone. Others defended him, calling the moment a distraction from real policy. But the damage was done. Because the internet doesn't care about policy nuance. It cares about moments. And this one had gone nuclear. A meme began circulating the next day. It showed Morelle mid-scoff and Bondi mid-rebuttal, with the caption, "When the prosecutor says, 'Let me finish,' you let her finish." Cable news replayed the segment again and again. Bondi was requested for interviews across 5 networks. She declined most, choosing instead to appear on one primetime show where she calmly stated, "People are tired of the performance politics. They want someone who will say what everyone else is too scared to say. I just happened to do it live." The host leaned back and said what most viewers were thinking, "Well, you didn't just say it. You served it." And perhaps the most surprising fallout of all? A rare flash of agreement online, from people on both sides. Some liberals grudgingly admitted Bondi held her ground better than any Republican pundit in years. Independents praised her poise. Even critics of her politics had to concede, she didn't lose her cool. She just took control. And Joe Morelle? He wasn't seen on live TV for the rest of the week. In Washington, viral moments come and go. A gaffe, a quote, a confrontation, all swallowed by the next 24-hour news cycle. But this one felt different. The clip of Pam Bondi confronting Joe Morelle didn't just trend, it embedded itself in the political bloodstream. The confrontation wasn't just memorable because of what was said, but because of how it was said: calm, measured, devastating. It was a rare alignment of poise, purpose, and perfect timing. And in the days that followed, the echoes refused to die. On Capitol Hill, staffers across party lines buzzed about it in elevators, cafeterias, and off-the-record happy hours. "Did you see Bondi torch Morelle?" became as common a phrase as "what's in the bill?" Even some progressive aides, in private, admitted he walked into that one. Joe Morelle's office issued a lukewarm statement 2 days later, calling the segment a missed opportunity for civil discourse. It was the political version of waving a white flag. Meanwhile, Bondi wasn't celebrating. She didn't need to. She didn't gloat on social media, didn't tour the networks on a victory lap. She let the footage speak. She let the internet talk. And it talked plenty. Conservative influencers hailed her as the iron prosecutor and the only one who fights back without losing her cool. Fox News segments analyzed her tone and delivery like it was game film. A law school professor even broke it down as an example of rhetorical discipline in hostile forums. "This is what you teach students about controlling the room." But for Pam Bondi, the moment wasn't about fame or optics. It was about a principle and a point she felt too few were willing to make. That truth isn't fragile. That it can survive the spin, the snark, the mockery, and even turn those things back on themselves. In one podcast appearance later that week, Bondi summarized it simply: "I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to expose the game." And when someone mocks you for telling the truth, the best thing you can do is shine more light on it. Back in New York, Morelle kept his head down. His usual social media schedule paused. No interviews, no panels. Rumor had it, he declined multiple network invites for follow-up debates. His team insisted it was due to scheduling. No one believed it. On the ground, voters took notice not just of the exchange, but of the shift in tone it seemed to trigger. Bondi's moment cut through the fog of partisan talking points like a beam. It wasn't polished spin or staged outrage. It was sharp, unapologetic clarity. And people responded because they were starving for it. Clips of the exchange made their way into campaign ads, commentary videos, and even political satire skits. One comedian summed it up with brutal accuracy: Joe Morelle came with a smirk, and Pam Bondi handed him a subpoena. But the biggest takeaway wasn't that Bondi won, it's that she showed what winning looks like when you don't back down, don't get rattled, and don't play by the media's expected rules. She flipped the script. She didn't shout. She didn't storm out. She didn't use buzzwords. She used facts, presence, and the patience of someone who had been underestimated too many times and had learned exactly how to use that to her advantage. In an age of optics over substance, she chose substance and still owned the optics. By the end of the week, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal read, "Pam Bondi didn't just win a debate. She reminded Americans what conviction sounds like." And that, more than anything, is what turned a 4-minute cable segment into a national flashpoint. Because in politics, moments like this don't just fade, they ripple. They inspire some. They humble others. And they leave a message behind. Never mistake calm for weakness. Never confuse a smile with surrender. And never ever mock a prosecutor on live television. Don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns like this, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay sharp, and never underestimate who's sitting across the table.